Well, what makes a challenging racetrack even more exciting is challenging to competitors. And we talk a lot about the 16 playoff drivers that have been in the field, but we have seen already this year, whether it was Suarez has been involved, Jimmy Johnson had some quotes about how he was raced, and even Saturday night at Richmond, we had an issue with a playoff and a non-playoff driver.
Right now, 24 is P1 for the dog. Pretty much everybody behind you is the next one. They're going to be racing their asses off with the lucky dog spot here, so just do what you can.
Alex Bowman on the bottom, Dillon in the middle, William Byron up top. And there's just not enough space for everyone. The 88 goes in.
Come his ass back as he gets to it. Get him back, get him back, get him back. Get him back now.
Austin Dillon says, listen, you may be in the playoffs and I'm not, but you're just not going to run me over. He sends the 88 up the racetrack.
I will shove that silver spoon he's been fed on his whole life up his good with it. Just do it later when we don't hurt ourselves. We don't need no penalties now. Just got to get her tuned up, get going. We ruined our car in a wreck for no reason. I didn't think we needed to do that.
All right, lots of layers here. So the first, let me say that before I had the audio, I was fine with what Austin Dillon did. I think that move by Alex Bowman is aggressive into turn one. I'm okay with it because he needed to have it, but there are repercussions.
Yes.
And I think the 88 went in there. Now, I was a little disappointed after the radio to find out perhaps the owner, Richard Childress, is I believe who we heard, and the crew chief kind of encouraged or actually almost ordered Austin Dillon to have to go back and wreck the 88, and he didn't seem on board with it. You're the veteran of the group. I'm going to let you go. What do you see of this?
Well, let's go back to what you were talking about. And what Alex Bowman did to start this whole issue is that he was trying to take advantage of a situation. And I think the playoff drivers expect to be given a little bit more courtesy. And that's wrong of them to think that. I appreciate that you've worked hard to get into the playoffs. But in the playoffs in NASCAR, everybody still participates and everybody still has a fair chance. I think most drivers that aren't in do extend a courtesy most of the time. But when you put somebody in a bad position, I think that you might as well expect to be paid back a little bit, whether it's a total spin or just a bump. Having to tell your driver to go do that, I think is totally up to the driver in that situation as to how you want to handle that situation. And in this case, as we heard that audio, that's a little different than what you'll hear most of the time. But Austin did it, and I didn't have a problem with what he did in the race.
Suarez and Logano at Vegas. And then I was shocked. There were some quotes from Jimmy Johnson basically saying he wasn't appreciated how he was raced at Las Vegas by some of the playoff guys. Now, granted, he's never been the guy on the outside. I really think this is a little bit of the effect of the entire season. With this new rules package, it used to be Daytona and Talladega, everybody was mad because nobody helped one another. But now it seems like every mile and a half, it just stokes that fire again and again and again. This is the move between Logano and Suarez. It turns back around, and Suarez kind of gets the 22 in the wall right here off turn two. Do you think it is what these guys are expected to do every week? Is that why we're seeing maybe it's even a little more heated than in years past?
I wouldn't disagree with that. I do really think with this package, it puts all these drivers in situations at most of these racetracks now where you can't really take a breath. I mean, we see on the restarts at all these mile-and-a-half racetracks. Heck, at Darlington, 3-4 wide down the back straightaway. It builds up every week. This is the longest season in professional sports. And as drivers, you just get heated. Like every weekend, like, okay, here we go again. And call it what it is. You are where you are in points because you're usually racing that same group of drivers every weekend. And I've been on both sides of it. I made the playoffs one year, and I spent a couple of years not in the playoffs. And yes, the playoff drivers, they expect a little bit more courtesy. And you don't want to be the guy. You don't want to be the guy that wrecks the guy so he doesn't make it to the next round or doesn't win the championship. But I always looked at it as they have more to lose than I do. Mm-hmm. We're not in the playoffs. So what does that mean? I'm quite mad. Like Jimmy Johnson, never been there before. Never not been in the playoffs. So he's upset. Every weekend he shows at the racetrack upset not being in the playoffs. Daniel Suarez, he's now with his second organization that has cars that have won, 40, 50 races over the course of 5 years, if you count Joe Gibbs and Stewart Haas Racing combined. He's not in the playoffs, so he's frustrated. He hasn't gotten a win yet. Austin Dillon, RCR, they're just having a poor year. So all these drivers that aren't in the playoffs, they're upset. So sure, they might give a little courtesy, but all it takes is just a little nudge, and then it just sets you off. And you got to remember that. You have more to lose than they do. So how much of a risk are you willing to take?
Well, I bring this up because non-playoff drivers, chaos, and the Roval, let's go back a year. DJ, we couldn't have built this last lap if we had tried.
No.
And it really happens on a late restart. When you go back to the Roval, they go down into turn 1 and they wreck all kinds of race cars, including Kyle Larson, which is one of the playoff drivers trying to make the playoffs. Yeah. And then you go out on this last lap, and he limps this car around the racetrack. I mean, this is coming into the last corner. First of all, the leaders wreck. So this changes who's going to win the race completely. Ryan Blaney sneaks through. This is just the start of this crazy finish. Yeah. All the way at the back, Jeffrey Earnhardt gets spun out. Can't get his car refired. Right here, you see Daniel Hemrick spin the 96 into the wall. This isn't a video game, folks. This is Kyle Larson, who was involved in that restart wreck I mentioned. He's driving this thing around like a video game, in the gas, into the wall. Jeffrey Earnhardt couldn't get his game refired. So listen, Jeffrey Earnhardt's not in the playoffs.
Yeah.
This is how every car on the racetrack matters, and that's why I think we bring this up, because you mentioned those little nudges.
Yeah.
That's going to happen all the time at that Roval. That slow infield section, there are going to be some frustrated guys.
And we keep looking at the points. There are so many drivers grouped up from basically 9th.
Oh.
Take out Eric Jones having to win the race, but obviously he's going to be doing everything he has to try to win it. But you take from 9th on back, a couple of stage points here and there, they could shift everything. So everybody in that group, I think Kyle Larson, I'm not going to say he's fully safe, but 25 up.
He's safe until he misses out in the first stage.
That's true.
If he rings a 0 in the first stage,
that's
and Ryan
true.
Newman knows.
So he's not fully safe. So you can even put Kyle Larson in that group. But that's 9 drivers that are going for 4 or 5 spots. And it's just going to be everybody on edge. Restarts at the Roval we've seen are chaotic. Strategy with tires, because it does wear tires out there. So, yeah, it's going to be insane. Drivers are frustrated. You're going to run into somebody at the Roval. I don't care where you're running. There is going to be contact.
So as a crew chief, I'm coaching my driver up. I'm saying, DJ, listen, I know you want to run good. I know you will, but we call them turtles. There's these big metal things inside. This car won't make it.
Yeah.
You hit them all day long. Don't come back to me and say this thing broke. This is one of the few tracks that still exists, much like Watkins Glen, where the drivers can break a race car. Not to mention running into another race car. So I'm going to ask my driver to do a lot, manage the emotion and the racetrack.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a great point a while ago, how the package this year, it used to be you had Daytona, then you had a couple of months before you went to Talladega, then you had a couple of months before you went back to Daytona, and then a couple more months before you were back at Talladega. So you had time to calm down from these ultra-competitive races where all of this builds up inside of you, and you're kind of mad at everyone unless you happen to win the race. And so, but now they face this on a weekly basis, and we could see things like that happen. Just a nudge can turn in, it can set somebody off where that used to not matter. Now they're so much on edge that just that nudge sends you over the edge.
It's a street course, meaning the walls are right there. So if you're mad at that guy, you don't have to hit him hard. It's just you're done. Thank you.
I'm fired up. Let's roll this thing off tomorrow. I'm ready.